that aren't aware, I'm going to let Frank explain this a little bit. Our listeners that aren't aware of the world of vibrating anal beads, Frank is really well versed in this world. So Frank, tell everyone how these work.
You.
Okay, so Frank told me before the show, he's getting embarrassed now. He's getting a little shy. So you can buy anal beads that go in your butt that vibrate on command, so on cue. So Frank says you got like a little remote control use, and you can, it's like a back massager. You can do different settings, he said, and he's got the expensive ones.
Like a back massager.
He walks around work with these things, keeps him motivated and excited.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God here.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Frankie, you cheating son of a bitch. Frank had a girlfriend years ago. Frank had a girlfriend years ago that no matter
what a way to start.
No matter what happened in the tabloids, she would always follow it up with "all men cheat," and then she'd be mad at Frank for like a week. No matter what happened, no matter how good of a guy Frank was, she would paint him with the same umbrella. All men cheat. One of our favorite things to say to each other every time someone gets busted. Whenever someone gets busted in the paper, we still say "all men cheat."
That's hysterical. I forgot all about that.
Do you remember the time we had a few too many beers and we called her at like 3 a.m. and said we were cheating right now with her with ham sandwiches and mayonnaise?
Yes, that was before the weekend we were together, where you may or may not have said something.
May or may not have even happened, what Frank is alluding to.
What was funny about that was the same time where you had just come back from Italy. You guys had conceived IJ, didn't even know it yet. You brought back all these Brunellos, and I think the two of us had like 9 bottles of wine. And by the end, I'm like, this one wasn't as good as the first one. You're like, yeah, that's kind of how it goes, Frank. You don't bring out the best shit at the end.
Yeah, I'm not giving you a $500 bottle on bottle 9. So, Frankie, today we are going to talk about fairness and cheating. It seems like every day you open the paper, it has been just this rash of cheating scandals happening everywhere. And one of the first ones that I saw just in the last couple of weeks, this story went crazy viral. So have you seen the videos of the guys at the fishing tournament? There's a walleye fishing tournament that cheated to win the tournament.
I did not see that.
Okay, so I've got it. It's a TikTok video. It's this is just before, so they had just weighed their fishes in, and these guys won. It was like a 3-day fishing tournament, and they just weighed it in, and everyone got really suspicious because their fish looked to be about the same size as everyone else's fish, but they weighed twice as much. So what you're about to see is a clip of the main official at this event cuts open their fish. So people claimed, foul play and, cut those fish open because it's way too heavy. And so what you're about to see is the clip of him cutting open the fish.
What was it? Oh, yeah, let's go.
We got weights and fish! There we go! Out of here! You don't need them! Where's the other one? You fucking that's fucking right! You're a fucking piece of shit! Get the fuck out of here! You piece of fucking shit! You all these fucking everybody's money back! Fuck yeah! Fuck yeah! You piece of shit! You motherfucker! Yeah, go get chased that motherfucker! All these motherfucking years! Look at that! Go get that motherfucker! How you looking now? Huh? You lost all these fucking years! We're winning! You fucking piece of shit! No wonder you lost! You fucking piece of shit! Ooh-wee!
So, Frankie, I would not want to be those two dudes that just got caught and they're surrounded by a bunch of angry sports fishermen with multiple gun racks.
Right. Most people who fish are card-carrying members of the NRA. So
Yes.
that's going to be
Yes.
ugly. Like
Yes.
that was like, as that whole thing's kind of happening, we're watching that video, like it was just uncomfortable, like super uncomfortable, right? Like you thought someone was going to get shot right there. And I had completely and totally missed this story. Ian's been texting me about some things we're going to talk about later. This story, I didn't even watch it. So like for me, it was like, this is the first time I've seen it, but it makes you pissed off for the people who were cheated. And I think that's where we're going to kind of drive at today is like, there's the people who cheated and you're like, you son of a bitch. How long have you been getting away with this? You can hear someone even scream in the video, all these years.
All these years, right? So it's not even just now it makes you, so and this is what we're going to get into a lot. So this was the most followed story on TikTok, which is kind of a young person's deal. And I got to imagine walleye fishing was not a terribly searched topic on TikTok before this happened, but it resonated with people all over the world, millions and millions of views. Everyone who posted it got 1 million views on this. It resonates with people because you don't need to be a walleye fisherman to have been cheated before, to have felt like you were playing a game that was rigged, to have felt like someone got away with something. Because this is where the whole thing breaks down. And I think where people get so mad, it's not just you screwed me, because there's real cash prizes, $25,000, $50,000 for these big tournaments. It's real cash prizes. So the guy in number 2 was like, I was straight up robbed out of this, to the point where they called the police. The police took those guys away.
Good.
That guy left in a police cruiser because people filed criminal complaints against him. Now he got out of jail. I don't know if anything's going to happen out of that, but I think where
they didn't file him away with Red and Andy and with the sodomites.
Well, you got laundry duty first night, fish, new fish.
You'll think you've been by a train.
New fish. But they, I think where it breaks down, Frank, is and where people get so angry is, if this is going on, how many other people will now try to get away with it?
Right.
And is it even worth fishing in these tournaments if I don't believe that they're fair? If I believe that the system is rigged, do I even want to fish anymore? Do I even like this sport? Like the whole thing crumbles if folks like this are getting away with this on a regular basis, and it makes you feel like you're playing a game that's not worth working that hard for.
So I'm going to go way, way broader on this. And as we're recording this, like there's the war in Russia, right? And Russia has attacked the Ukraine. And it feels like everybody is behind the Ukraine. Like I live in Richmond, Virginia, and there's yellow and blue flags everywhere. And like we're supporting them. But look who isn't supporting the Ukraine. Who's supporting Russia? Iran and China and like these traditional bad actors, right? Who have been bad actors for centuries, centuries go back. So the reason I bring that up is I think that's what pisses us off so much, is because we have an understanding that there is a point where you just stop caring. And how far does the ball drift from the dock? If this is allowed, what follows it, and then what follows it, and then what moral fabric is left? And what we're going to talk about today, like I started thinking about like broader examples, right? People have done
Frankie, stay on that though. That's brilliant. I hadn't even thought about this as it went to why are we spending billions of dollars? Why is America giving billions of dollars to Ukraine, right? Who is on the other side of the world, who is not a big strategic partner of America or our security interests. It's because if you allow Russia to do this, that it's breaking international laws that the world had agreed to. It's breaking that law. And if this goes, what's next? China goes into Thailand, it goes into Taiwan and takes Taiwan. And Iran starts making more nuclear weapons. Like people start ignoring all of the international laws. You have anarchy. You don't have a society.
So let's just stop with those three things, right? Russia moves into the Ukraine. If China goes into Taiwan, and then there's the other piece of Iran going, it's not just Iran, but if they're going to pick on anybody that's in their region, it's Israel. Right. So it's like you start looking at these things and it's like it very quickly denigrates into there was these rules and there was these laws and there's things put in place. And if they can't be trusted, what can be trusted? It's like the difference between standing on solid ground and standing on quicksand. You just don't know what you can trust.
Yeah.
And there needs to be some type of an organization or legislation or policing that will prevent, that sets the rules and then holds people accountable. Like the fact that those two guys were taken away in a cruiser is what should have happened, in my opinion, after watching that video, because if they weren't, like someone's going to follow them and probably hang them. And like we're going to probably get into the story. You're going to tell a story about what Nilo said. Like there's probably going to be some vigilante justice on that, because that's just not the type of group of people you want to screw with.
Well, and you know, Frank, when you even look at what's happening in Ukraine, why are there Ukraine flags in Richmond, Virginia? It's because humans share a common sense of, you know, there's a just world and there's humanity and there's laws and we follow them, and you can't be let to get away with certain things, because and everything we're going to talk about when it comes to cheating today is about the domino effect. Like very quick, it doesn't take someone with a high IQ to see that if Russia just goes in and takes Ukraine, what are the next like that won't be the end of it. The dominoes keep getting away. So there has to be some accountability when there's cheating of some kind. And when you talk about accountability here, those guys were so mad. Like our good friend Neil, he's the only fisherman we know that would be in a competitive fishing tournament. But I asked him, is this normal to cheat? And he's like, yeah, people are always kind of accusing people. Some guys will go put a fat fish in a cage and put a buoy somewhere in the water and let him out of the cage and catch it and drop it in there. He's like, there's some of that. And there's people have done waiting before, but guys like going this viral, those guys will never fish in a tournament again in the country. That not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not in 20 years. They're infamous now. And Neil thinks there's going to be some justice. Either they're going to mess with the guy's cars or their house, or someone's going to do something even worse to those guys, because that's, you know, in that community, there is a deep sense that there was a misjustice and there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be some kind of ramifications, or it will keep happening and it will ruin the sport.
Yeah. So I think what we do is, we're not fishermen. I think let's just get into the next story. Talk about
the other story that's similar, and there's multiple that are around the same lines, which I find very fascinating. So Frankie, are you any good at chess?
No.
I'm not. I'm more of a checkers guy than a chess guy. I've never taken the time to learn chess. But Magnus Carlsen is very, very good at chess. And even if you don't know anything about chess, you've likely heard of Magnus Carlsen. He is largely thought of between Magnus and Bobby Fischer as the two greatest to ever play the game. Kasparov is up there, but he's on the, let's say he's on.
Hold on one second. So
Mount
if you're
Rushmore.
thinking about tuning out right now because it's chess, the two brilliant stories with incredible followings, fishing and chess, allow me to say the following. This is the Queen's Gambit meets anal love beads. And if you were thinking about tuning out,
No one's thinking
buddy,
of tuning out.
this is the moment where you
Frank,
must.
no one tunes out on this show.
Like
No
I
one
would take
tunes
us
out.
from 2x speed down to 1x speed. Like it's going to get good.
No one ever
No one would
turns us
dare
off.
you.
No one turns us off. So Magnus has been champion since 2013. He is the GOAT of our era, and he's had a 53 match winning streak, which is preposterous. It's preposterous you go that long in chess without ever losing. So he goes into a tournament and he's playing the lowest rated player in the field. This would be like a 16 seed playing number 1 Duke in the March Madness tournament, and he gets whipped. Like not even it's a blowout. He gets burned, right? And this is a guy that doesn't happen. And so everyone is like, whoa. And he loses to a guy named Hans Niemann, who, as this is happening, he's having this, just to have gotten into the tournament, he had this insanely hot run from a no name to, someone who is being considered as one of the better chess players. And in chess, that doesn't typically happen. So Carlsen comes out afterward and has a couple of cryptic tweets. And then finally people ask him, what do you mean? He say, I believe that Niemann cheated. I believe he cheated more than he has publicly admitted. And so digging in, it comes out that Hans Niemann had admitted to cheating when he was younger. And chess has changed a lot since COVID. Beforehand, it was always in person, but online chess blew up during COVID because they couldn't have regular tournaments, and big names like Carlsen started playing online chess. And with online chess, artificial intelligence, these computers are now better than humans when it comes to chess. They can kind of predict millions of moves before they ever happen, to the point where even a dumbass like myself could enter an online tournament, and if I had the right AI software, it would have me beat Magnus. It would tell me the right move every time to go beat him, and he just can't compete because he can't keep it all in his head. So this all comes out. Neiman says, no, I absolutely didn't cheat. This is bogus. Then they have a rematch online, and one move into it, Magnus Carlsen, this is kind of his big protest moment. He resigns the match and clicks his camera off, and everyone goes nuts. Like, oh my God, this is scandalous. I can't believe Carlsen did it. And he was protesting that this guy's a cheater. And so chess.com went in, they have software that can predict if you've been cheating. So it knows your normal moves, and then it can see and sense when you start performing at a much higher level than your capacity. And they went and found that 100 of his online wins were dubious at best, that looked like he was using illegal artificial assistance. And so now the chess world is just on fire, and for the same reasons, because how is this happening? And now when you go into a chess match, so this is where it gets really fascinating. So for our listeners that aren't aware, I'm going to let Frank explain this a little bit. Our listeners that aren't aware of the world of vibrating anal beads, Frank is really well versed in this world. So Frank, tell everyone how these work.
You.
Okay. So Frank told me before the show, he's getting embarrassed now. He's getting a little shy. So you can buy anal beads that go in your butt that vibrate on command, so on cue. So Frank says you got like a little remote control use, and you can, it's like a back massager. You can do different settings, he said, and he's got the expensive ones.
Like a back massager.
He walks around work with these things, keeps him motivated and excited. So apparently people have been cheating by sticking anal beads up their butt. And what happens is a lot of these tournaments are live streamed, so you can see the moves as they're happening. So what they need is a partner who is watching the match and then giving them like Morse code symbols of what to do on the next play. So the bead will vibrate that is up their butt, because they're padded down at these events. And so now the chess world's losing their mind. So they're paying for all the security where they're going through full body scans that can see if there's an illegal object up your butt. They've got checks to see if there's any radio frequency coming out of your body, because they're doing everything they can to convince, they make their money based on people believing it's a fair game and paying to watch this stuff, to convince people it's a fair game. And it's not just chess. Recently in high stakes poker, a top ranked player, Garrett Adelstein, he lost.
Adelstein? His name is Adelstein?
Adelstein.
He got some beads in his ass.
He lost to an amateur who went all in on a nothing hand. And so people are saying either the poker world's kind of divided as to whether she cheated, but people are saying either she absolutely cheated because she knew what cards he had, or she's just an absolutely terrible poker player to have gone all in on that hand. And now people are insinuating that she's been using vibrating anal beads. That's at the heart of the scandal. But it's just been all over the paper. All kinds of all of these scandals have happened in the last month, which led us to discuss, why do people just hate cheaters so much?
So as you were telling these stories, right, the only thing I could think about was that scene in Casino where the guy almost gets his hand cut off.
Yeah.
Cuts part of his hand off, right? There's like the vigilante justice that comes due at this
They
part.
beat it with a hammer.
Oh, they beat him with a hammer, and then like this guy at the window, like it was like So
And what's amazing is when you watch that scene, Frankie, it's a really satisfying scene. It's like, yeah,
yes,
that son of a gun's getting what he deserved.
you're rooting for the guy to get it like dismembered.
Yes.
Like that's how it is. So what I think we want to get into is, let's just get into it. Like, why do people cheat? And let's go.
I don't know what's the top reason that comes to your mind if someone were to say, why do people cheat?
They want to win. So when I was a kid, if you would cheat, it's because you wanted to win. As an adult, if you cheat, I think it's because you're not willing to put in the work to do it legitimately.
So laziness?
No. Laziness is someone who smokes a shitload of weed and plays video games and doesn't really do much, right? It's laziness with ambition. Those two things put together, like, I don't want to, like, it's hard to do it legit. And it's very hard. So there's that side of it. Like, if you've ever seen like Blow with Johnny Depp, right? Or any of these movies, you always root for the criminal, but then when the criminal gets caught, they always try and go mainstream. And it's just harder to do it that way. So you get accustomed to a life that you don't want to lead. You get accustomed to a life and then you want to come back to it. So
I think that's where we're staying on those. So you say, I agree with this. I think there's multiple reasons why, but I think you're delving down. I think it's ambition and a lack of patience. So you are ambitious to the point that you can't wait and do it the right way. And so you want to try to take some shortcuts to try to get there faster because you can't just patiently follow the right path.
Or you've never had the goods. So if you ask me who is the biggest cheater you've ever come up against, what I would say is it's the Spin Doctors. That's a band. And I'll tell you the story. So I was a high school senior, 1993, and I used my money and I had a date. I bought tickets for me and a date. And we went and saw 3 bands, right? It was like 2 lesser bands. It was the Screaming Trees, it was Soul Asylum, and it was the Spin Doctors. And the Spin Doctors were like the hottest thing ever. Like, I don't think the Screaming Trees are that great, but they got up on stage and they sounded pretty good and they sounded like they did on the radio. And I was like, okay, not my favorite, but they're pretty good. Soul Asylum was awesome. They were just awesome. Like they were legit. They were great musicians. They sounded great. Like everything, their stage presence, they were like, the lead singer was dating Winona Ryder. Like, they were legit and they were awesome. And they were second. So when you go to a concert, the people who play last are supposed to be the best. And Spin Doctors had 2 or 3 super popular songs. And they get out and they were terrible. I mean, they were awful. They were off key. They sounded bad. They were like dorks. They didn't belong there. And it really pissed me off. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, they're cheating. What they did is they had incredible production. They had 2 or 3 good songs. They didn't sound very good, but in production, they made them sound incredible. And I remember feeling pissed off, like, for years. Like, I'm still pissed, and it's been 20, 30 years. So I thought about it over the years, and I realized this: Spin Doctors were never going to make it unless they cheated. So they did. They wanted to get there.
You wouldn't know their name if they hadn't cheated, because they just weren't good enough to do anything in the first place.
That's right. Somehow or another, they ended up with 2 or 3 really good songs, but they just didn't have the goods. And
yeah, so they actually could have put the hours in. They might have been putting lots of hours in. They just had the production, but all the hours in the world were never going to make them good. They had to amplify it.
So I don't know this, and I can look it up. Like, I don't know if they wrote like their songs. I don't know if they wrote it. Maybe they were really destined to be songwriters and they wanted to be performers. But like, Two Princes is one of their big songs, right? Like, let's look at this. Do you know that song, Ian?
Yeah.
So Two Princes, Wikipedia.
Princes, They Adore You.
Yeah. I mean, this thing was like bananas. And
yeah,
but like, what I wanted to know is this: it's released, second album, Puck Vocal Peak, top the charts. Who wrote it? Songwriters. Yeah. So I don't know who wrote it. It's 4 names. I don't know. Mark White, Chris Barron. So maybe they were just songwriters and they weren't really artists, but like, they got up on stage and they sang, and it was repulsive. And like, I literally still can remember that.
Well, so So we're going to get into a little bit in the sports world in a minute, but so when you talk about they just didn't have the goods, they couldn't do it in the first place. Very interesting. So two guys that are very linked to taking steroids to be better at baseball are Jose Canseco and Barry Bonds. But what's the difference between Canseco and Bonds, Frankie? In most people's opinion. In most people's opinion.
So I think people always thought Canseco was a bit of a crook, like he couldn't be trusted, and that they always thought he was dirty. And Jose Canseco is an outsider. Barry Bonds is not an outsider. Barry Bonds is an insider. Barry Bonds' dad played in Major League Baseball. Barry Bonds' godfather is who? Hank Aaron, right? No, not Hank. Willie Mays is his godfather.
Willie Mays, yeah.
Willie Mays is his godfather. So like he's baseball royalty. He was like a #1 overall draft pick out of Arizona State. Like he was always royalty. So Bonds kind of did the spin doctor route, or excuse me, Canseco did the spin doctor route. Like he kind of just faked it until he made it, and he got in there, and he was lovable. Him and Mark McGwire together, but like it came out pretty early, like he was on steroids. Everyone goes, of course he is. But he also admitted it, and he goes, I'm not the only one on steroids. There's a lot of people on steroids. And what it turned out is the person who was incredibly dirty was probably the most honest. And what people think about now is like, yeah, he was dirty, but he was honest about it. Like, is he going to go down as one of the greatest ever? No. Is his rookie card worth shit? No. Is he going in the Hall of Fame? No. Was he great when you were like 13 watching him smash home runs? Absolutely. And you kind of hold the special place in your heart for him. Now, Barry Bonds was better than Jose Canseco, had natural gifts that Jose Canseco didn't have. And he had, I think Canseco had like a 12, 13-year career, where Bonds had like a 22-year career. Now, what Bonds did is he had the audacity to be incredibly great from birth, plus he stuck around for 20-something years, and then he broke one of the most hallowed records in baseball. And because he broke that record, and baseball is a sport of box scores, people hate him for it, like absolutely hate him for it. And I don't know, he's looked at as a major, major pariah because of what he did. And he's never, to my knowledge, he's never really come out and admitted any of it.
So I think both of them are stories of ambition, but I think Jose Canseco falls under your definition of didn't have the goods. So Canseco was a nobody. He would have never got out of the minors. And then all of a sudden, you know, he was like a late round draft pick, not a big prospect. And then all of a sudden one year he shows up to training camp and he's 25 pounds heavier, massive, like put on a ton of muscle. He's fast as hell and he's hitting bombs everywhere. And he just like fast tracked straight to the pros. The only time we ever knew of Jose Canseco was him with huge biceps and a big chest hitting dingers. Like that's it. Barry Bonds was one of the best players in baseball, period. He'd won multiple MVPs as a skinny left fielder with a really quick bat and 5 tools. Like he was destined for the Hall of Fame if he'd have just stayed skinny. He could hit homers, he could run with speed, he could throw, he could catch. And then all of a sudden he put on 50 pounds and became the best player in history. Like not the best player of his era, better than Babe Ruth, better than big names that are, you know, sacred in the sport. And they elicit different reactions out of people. Canseco's kind of like, well, I'd have never heard of him if not for the steroids. Bonds, people are pissed about because you went and ruined the record books, right? To the point where Aaron Judge just hit 62 home runs, and most people are saying that's the home run record. Not Barry Bonds, not Sosa, not McGwire. Judge did it, and we'll get into this legitimately. We'll see. You know, but that's what those two different things. One was you're a nobody and no one would ever heard of you without cheating. And the other is your ambition is so big, you weren't good enough with just being great. You had to be the greatest of all time. So you cheated. So I think people do things out of desperation sometimes, Frankie. They're in a bad place in their life. So they cheat, they find ways to do it because they're in a, you know, they kind of a Breaking Bad situation. And I also think that it's a slippery slope on why people cheat. I think, you know, maybe they do something small where most people wouldn't care and they get away with it. It's rewarded. Yeah. And then it grows into something much larger. And I have an awesome story about this from college. Good friend of mine went to Michigan State, and one of the smartest guys I've ever known in my life. He was like that in high school, just it got away with it in high school, didn't study and would still beat me on tests that I studied for hours on. He was just really smart. And, you know, he would try to get away with little cheating here and there. And it was his stated goal, Frankie, to do as little work as he could at college and still graduate. And he was great at it. You know, I'd go see him a month into the semester and he'd still have plastic on his textbooks. He hadn't even opened them yet. So he gets himself into a bad place where he needs a final exam or he's going to flunk a class. Like, he's not getting away with it anymore. He's in engineering and he's trying to figure out how to do this. This class, there were so many people in it that there were 2 exams, and you could choose to go to the morning exam or the afternoon exam. The morning exam was at like 9 in the morning, and the afternoon exam was at 3 in the afternoon. And my buddy did his homework on it and figured out how the exams were set up. And so what he did, and he thought of this at the beginning of the semester, he grew a beard out for the whole semester, and he grew his hair long. So his hair went down to his shoulders. And he never went to class. So the teacher didn't know what he looked like. He didn't go to class all semester. No one knew what the hell this guy looked like. So he goes in the morning and he fakes like he's taking the exam with his beard, looking like the Unabomber, fakes like he's taking the exam. And you had to go turn the exam in to the professor at the end of the exam. And so he writes down all the questions on the exam on his hand, on the inside of his arm, everywhere. He gets all the questions to this exam. And then he goes in and he turns in an exam with a fake name at the top. And it's kind of written out like he had been taking it, looks the professor in the eyes, hands it to him, and leaves. Goes home. He's got 4 hours now and all of the questions from the exam. Goes to the barber, shaves cleanly, gets his hair cut into like a crew cut almost, as low as he can, and dresses up really nice for the afternoon exam. Now he's got all the answers to the exam. Goes in, retakes the exam looking like a totally different person, like wears a button-down shirt, dresses like a nerd. He dressed like a grunge guy in the morning, goes in with all the answers, crushes the exam, goes in, and this is the stress. I get like sweaty thinking about it. The guy he had just turned the exam into 5 hours earlier walks up with his exam, looks him in the eyes, hands him the exam, and this professor would look you right in the face, nodded at him. The guy didn't recognize him. He walked out. He had the guts to do all this, got an A, aced the class. When he told me the story, I laughed my ass off because it just, it would have been so stressful to do what he did. It'd be easier to just go to class and study. I laughed my ass off. I thought it was funny, but then I got a second piece of this story. So then for me, the next year, I'm in a class. It's called electrostatic physics. One of the hardest classes I ever took. It was like the class that made me think I don't want to be an engineer. Like, this shit is really hard and it's boring. But Frankie, I put so many hours in for so little returns in that class. And I think I eked out a C. And the guy that was in my fraternity class didn't go to shit all year long, failed the first 2 exams, failed just about everything. He was desperation mode. But the final, if you ace the final, you could either get the grade on the final or the average of your grades so far in the class. So if you ace the final, it replaced everything.
All right.
And it was a multiple choice test, which most engineering classes were not engineering. They were show your work. So I went in, I studied my ass off. My boy, I had just written him off. He was getting an F. He goes in.
Is this the same kid or is it somebody else?
Totally different guy. This is at my school at Purdue.
Okay. Wes didn't go to Purdue? I thought he did.
No. He went to Michigan State.
Okay.
So this guy goes into the same exam that I'm in. I muddle my way through it, barely get a C on the exam after studying for months. And this guy goes in and cheats off of the smartest kid in the class, right? The kid that always sat up in the front, and cheats off of him and gets an A on the final exam, and he got an A in the class. Did no work, but he risked getting expelled from school. Now, when the guy who was in my class did what the other guy did, cheated to get an A in the class, I didn't find it cute at all. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find the story interesting.
Because you were a victim.
I was bitter, and I wasn't
Yeah.
a victim. I'd have got a C no matter what. There wasn't even a
It wasn't a curve. There wasn't a curve.
There wasn't a curve, but I felt I was pissed. I wasn't like, hey, that's funny. I was bitter because I put in so many hours on this. And it stuck with me for a long time, to the point where I'm like, what the hell am I working so hard for? I might as well just do what he did,
Right.
even though there was risks and everything that came to it. And I think that's why we hate cheaters so much, is because it just breaks down the whole fairness of the game.
Could be that. I don't know the answer as to why we hate the cheaters, but what I can tell you is we dislike them. I looked it up. Jose Canseco was in the 15th round. That's when he was drafted. Barry Bonds was number 1 overall pick. And the 4 guys from the Spin Doctors did write that song. Pretty good songwriters.
But Frankie, you look at guys that got disgraced. Look at athletes that got disgraced.
Yeah.
Mike Vick and Mike Tyson.
Yep.
Jump out, right? Mike Vick, because he was running a dog fighting ring, he was the most hated person in the country for a good few months, right? I mean, do you remember that? It was gross. Like, people could not stand Mike Vick. Like, they hated his ass because Americans love dogs.
And
People love
I'm
dogs.
in Virginia. Like, it happened right here.
Yes. And today, Mike Vick is that's all been forgiven. He's on TV. He's a radio personality. He's working again. I largely don't have the same hatred feelings to him. I kind of feel like he's a victim of how he grew up, all of that. What at the time I didn't like him. Same with Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson for a while was just, persona non grata when he went to jail. Now he's this like friendly Uncle Mike. He's got his podcast. People love Tyson again, but it's very different than Bonds and Canseco. It's very different. In what is the reason why it's different?
They cheated outside of the ring. In the ring, they were honest.
Yeah. So they didn't, even though they were bad people, or, acted as bad people in society, they weren't bad actors inside of the ring or on the football field. They didn't hurt the integrity of the game.
So the best example of this I have is on Kobe Bryant, right? They just did a whole documentary on the Redeem Team. I haven't watched it. I've read about it. And the Redeem Team was the team we'd lost the gold, and Krzyzewski came back and he went after Kobe first, and he recruited him. And the reason he wanted Kobe is Kobe was the best basketball player in the world at the time. LeBron and D Wade and Carmelo were all really, really young.
They were coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And Kobe had lost all of his endorsements because he had gotten accused of rape, and he didn't handle it really well. He was still really fucking arrogant throughout the whole process. So what happened was Krzyzewski made it as pure as could be. He made him the captain of the team, essentially, but they brought him to a point where he could play basketball, be great on the biggest stage in the Olympics, and helping our country win a gold medal when we hadn't won one before. And what happened was Kobe died tragically as a low 40-year-old. But when Kobe came after that moment, he was beloved again. He got incredible amounts of endorsements. Like, it was forgiven that he was a terrible human for at least a snapshot of time. And he was forgiven because he was an incredible athlete. And we kind of put it in a box of, all right, maybe a bad guy, but he's somebody who is an incredible performer and was rewarded by us. So I'll ask you this, Ian, in this list, who's the worst and who's the best, right? Or maybe say, who's the one you like the least? Who's the one you dislike the most? Like, if you're going to rank them, here's the list: Roger Clemens, Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds, or Pete Rose. Who's the one you like?
I like Pete Rose the most.
Exactly. I don't even know how to ask the question, right? Like, who's the one you dislike the least is the way to ask that question. And why do you dislike Pete Rose the least? I can tell you why I do.
So Pete Rose, his scandal was he bet on baseball games, and he bet on his
terrible
own team.
human, IRS problems, gambled, but he always gambled on himself. Clemens, who I loved as a Red Sox, definitely was taking PEDs. So about McGwire, same thing with Bonds. These guys who cheated the game. And I would take Rose, who was arrogant as shit and would bet on himself, over anybody else, because he, to our knowledge, he did it clean on the field.
Yeah, and I think for your career, it's the same thing. I think in general, I think people are incredibly forgiving of missteps in your lives, right?
Yep.
I think those things tend to fade away. no matter what bad thing you kind of do, they tend to fade away and people remember the quality of your work. I think one thing people just are never forgiving of is an integrity breach, right? Something bad, you do something, it's, you can spend your whole career building up your personal brand and then it comes out that you were cheating. What it does is it breaks down everything. Now they say, okay, how many other things do we not know about that you were cheating about? If you're not a person of integrity, is your whole career a lie? And I think when you come out when it comes out that you were cheating, I feel like it is one of the few things that are just irredeemable, that you just can't ever come back from. You can come back from almost anything in a career. Cheaters tend to be labeled the rest of their life as all of their success is because they didn't play it straight.
One of the things that Ian and I both love, we love like 80s wrestling, right? We were talking about earlier, Ian's wearing an 80s wrestling shirt right now. We were literally, who is it? Iron Sheik, right?
Iron Sheik.
And there's always the heel in wrestling. And like Ric Flair is probably the most popular heel of all time. Like he was just a heel. That's what he did. He was like a little too arrogant, a little like he was just too much. But like in international sports, the biggest heel to me was the East Germans and the Russians. And the reason that you always now this wasn't for show, this was for real. And the reason, and like the popular 80s movie was Rocky IV, where Rocky is good and he fights against the evil and the systemic problem in the Russian system is they cheated systemically, right? Like that is the problem. And that is the reason why, like internationally, they were never thought very highly of. They're incredibly good, but you ask yourself, what percentage of this is legitimate? Like what percentage is it because you were getting a needle in the shoulder since you were 6? And what percentage is it is just hard work and talent? And when you look at the Olympics, it's supposed to be amateurs.
All the East German female swimmers with mustaches and deep voices.
Right. We're not even going to get into the woke cultural thing now that's going on with like people with penises swimming as girls, but we'll leave that out. But that is one of the things that like in my lifetime, there was always that group of people, because you just knew they were cheating. And it wasn't like some mom driving their daughter to gymnastics starting at 4. Like there was an element of that, but there was also the element of, well, what unfair advantage did that person have because of it? And it makes for good TV, but it also leads to hatred.
But I think, Frank, I mean, whatever, we can go here. There's a reason why parents of female swimmers are so up in arms about, people with gender transitions swimming against the girls, because this comes down to there are rules and there is fair play.
There's boundaries.
And the way they say it is, where does that end? Can
Right.
now any guy just put a Speedo on and jump in the pool and compete against the girls? If that's the case, why have girls and boys sports? Why not just say they're sports and anyone can compete? You're breaking down the boundaries and the rules of what everyone thought they were doing. And my kid is playing it fair, working really hard, but it's not a fair environment. That's why there's so much anger built up around it, that a lot of people think, well, that's just straight up cheating. You have testosterone in your body and girls don't, and it's not fair. It's scientifically proven.
There's also something else to it, right? The thing we talked about with the chess earlier is you're taking someone who isn't winning and they immediately start to win. If you change the environment, you put people, like the competition is different. So it's one of those things. It's a little bit different because it's not quite as understood, but at the same point, I think that's the ire comes from the same place.
And I think, Frank, not even to delve into politics here, but it's sort of political, but the average American is not disgusted with the idea of paying taxes. There have been lots of surveys on it. I think the average American would say, yes, we should pay taxes to live in a country this great and to have the services that we have. But survey after survey will say that Americans despise the idea that others are getting away with not paying the taxes that they are. So if you look at both sides of the political spectrum, the Democrats are always going to say the rich are getting away with not paying their fair share of taxes, whatever that means. And on the Republican side, they get all worked out of shape that Democrats aren't paying any taxes at all, that we're we're covering 80% of the country with some of the richest people, and those two sides always feel that way. There was a survey done by one of the Ivy League universities, but they surveyed 1,000 Americans, and 88% responded, yes, I am a taxpayer. But then they were asked, what percentage of Americans do you think pay taxes? And that number was 66%. So 90% pretty much feel like they're paying taxes, but they feel like some 30% lower than them are actually paying taxes. So there's this balance of fairness that comes into play where, and you think about that, right? If you believe everyone else is getting away with not paying their fair share of taxes,
Yep.
what does that make you want to do?
Not pay yours.
Not pay your taxes. And it's this endless spiral down, this kind of race to the bottom where everyone feels like they're the only one playing a fair game. And so then they start cheating, or they start finding ways to pull fast one on the IRS, or not paying their fair share because they don't want to live in a world where they're the only ones held to a certain standard.
That's right. That's right. You all want to be involved in a consistent kind of group struggle, but if you feel like people are outside of the fray, that's when there tends to be problems.
And there's a psychology term for this, Frankie. It's called the just world viewpoint. Have you ever heard of the just world viewpoint?
I have, because I read the agenda.
Oh, good for you. So like picture kids, they come into the world with a just world view. Like this is a just world. The golden rule. If I treat people right, if I follow the rules, everyone else will. And it's kind of wishful thinking, and it's a little ignorant when you're a kid, but you kind of, you find out over time that that's not exactly the case. And that's how people get so cynical and bitter when they start realizing that life doesn't work that way. It's not always a fair game. There are bias. The game can be rigged against you. And humans, we're a social species. We need to kind of read each other, and we need to be able to detect cheaters and liars. That's kind of essential to evolution. And it's, there's not a society on the planet where cheater detection isn't a fundamental issue. Cheaters, they need to be detected and they need to be punished. It's central to the integrity of a group or a society, because if cheaters are allowed to flourish, the group, the society itself, what's the point? It's in peril. It's the same with any organization.
It's kind of, I go back to governments with corruption. With governments with corruption, most people like to leave. They do their best to leave because it's really hard to understand where you are. One of the reasons that America is a place that people kind of have always wanted to come to for the last 250 years is because there's a series of rules. We kind of live by those rules. Are the rules perfect? Of course not, but they're written and they're understood. And you've got a guideline and a framework. And if you come from a place that's corrupt and you don't know what to, there's strong men running the countries, they persecute. This is one of the reasons we have thrived, is because we have a series of rules that people are mostly held accountable to.
Take cryptocurrency right now, Frank. There's not a lot of laws around it. There's not a lot of regulators that regulate cryptocurrency. And it's one of crypto's biggest problems, I think. That every week there's something new coming out, that a new person got scammed or lost $1 billion of investors' money. And until it starts conforming to the same rules, it's not going to ever do anything. It's also why I think Batman is one of the most popular comic book heroes of all time. If you think about Batman's a vigilante that on a nightly basis goes out and breaks the law, hurts people, breaks legs, breaks arms, throws people off of balconies, doesn't kill people, but does horrible things to people. But people love Batman because he's doing these horrific things to people who deserve it. He only goes after villains. He only goes after people that have already committed crimes, and he goes after people that are getting away with it. So all the villains you can think of in a Batman comic, right? Whether it's Joker or the Riddler or the Penguin, all of these are kind of, heads of criminal organizations that are out operating freely in society. And so when Batman beats the crap out of one of them, you love it because they represent people maybe in your own life that are getting away with breaking the law, with cheating, with doing other things, and you can't do anything about it. You feel helpless. So people love reading about Batman beating the crap out of people who are constantly getting away with breaking the law.
It's the reason I wrote down on this is Robin Hood, right? You talked about taxes earlier. Most people think rich people are not following the same rules they are because there's no possible way they could have gotten rich. I don't know how many reboots of Robin Hood there have been since we've been alive, but it's dozens. And it's the reason for that. It's the same thing. It's like you think someone's taking from the rich who unjustly have it, and you're giving it to the poor, which is a good pursuit. So to that end, he's a very popular figure going back hundreds of years.
So Frankie, in a company, what happens in a company if the leaders don't act when someone gets caught cheating or, you know, in some kind of an integrity breach? What happens to the culture of the company?
As far as I'm concerned, the culture of the company is deteriorated and kind of pulled back. It's not just necessarily cheating, it's ethical breaches, it's bad behaviors, there's other things to it than just cheating, right? Like if you have a superstar performer who's just a terrible human being and treats people like shit, it pulls at the fabric of a company. So it's really important that your company has a moral compass and that the leadership holds people accountable to it. And like, we've both dealt with this. There's superstar performers who in a lot of instances are not superstar humans. And you tend to have performers who are not superstars, but are superstar human beings. And what typically happens is there's a rub between the good human and the good performer. And what you have to do is you have to have a series of rules and you have to have a series of things in place and checks and balances, or things will get out of whack. I mean, I've seen that since I was a kid in certain organizations. And like, I can tell you as a leader and a business owner and a manager, it's real. And you have to balance those things out, and you can't let something get so far out of balance that you lose your integrity. One of the things that Ian and I both love is Warren Buffett's saying, it's actually in our company's core values, about not doing anything to disgrace the company, because if you lose $1, that's okay, but if you lose a shred of dignity, it is not, is how it's loosely summarized. And that's kind of how you have to act.
In a company, you have written rules, and then there are unwritten rules that are just kind of the golden rule, right? Do the right thing, right? You hear a lot of companies say, do the right thing. Frank and I worked at a company that said, do the right thing. It wasn't original because the company before that told us do the right thing. But honestly, it's the right advice, the same advice you learned from your mom and dad growing up. There are some things that don't need to be written down in policies and procedures, like fair play, like treating customers with a certain level of respect. But I think one famous example, Frankie, is Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo, I always thought was a piece of company, and I still do. They put so much pressure on employees. They're just managed horribly from the top down. Everything is a metric. Everything is hit your number. And they put so much pressure on growth. After the financial breakdown, Wells Fargo was actually, if you remember, they were one of the few banks that came out of the financial crisis sort of with strength, right? They took a lot of share. They didn't have a lot of the write-offs. They were kind of managed well going into it. Then out of it, they put so much pressure on growth on their people that everything was about opening more accounts. They tied bonuses to it. They pitted people against each other with their rankings. And then they started promoting people who opened the most accounts, regardless of how they got there, regardless of looking at what kind of human beings they were. And they fired people who couldn't keep up with opening accounts. But the problem was, some of those people getting promoted had figured out, we're just going to start opening accounts whether people ask us to or not, right? So you picture a little old lady who's 75, and I just opened a couple extra checking accounts that she didn't say she wanted, and she's not even checking or seeing that that's happening. And so their peers saw this. Their peers saw that people were cheating to open up more accounts to hit these numbers and go on these lavish contest trips and hit their bonuses and get promoted. And they thought, wow, well, that's what the company rewards around here. I'm going to start opening up accounts. It's that easy. It's that easy. I just got to open up accounts no one asked for. So everyone starts doing it. Then it spirals out of control, Frankie, to the point where there's a congressional hearing where they've been opening up tens of thousands of checking accounts for customers who never asked for it. And the CEO gets up in front of these people and says, I don't know what the hell got into these people. You put all this pressure on people, you promoted all these bad actors, and then the whole company followed suit. And now you throw them all under the grease when you have to go in front of Congress. Both that happened under your watch, that culture, because you let it happen once and it spiraled that fast where it became a major scandal. And Wells has not recovered from it. Wells just reported their earnings. They have no trust from the American people because they cheated, because they opened accounts without people asking. And it's this slippery slope where I get away with it once and no one said anything and I got rewarded. So I do it twice. And now all of a sudden it just becomes what I do. And I think it's like that way with any cheating.
I think you're right. And it's one of the, like, so I grew up in South Florida, right? The first time I ever saw Wells Fargo was in Back to the Future 3, which came out in like 1991. And it was pretty cool. Like, it was the California bank. And I remember when Wells Fargo kind of moved its way across the country, like you saw those beautiful horses and you're like, this is so cool. It's kind of mythical. And back then they were a very, very, very well-run bank. But I bank with them because I've had them forever. They kind of bought all the banks where I had all of my money, but I almost do it begrudgingly. And I certainly don't do anything with them besides have a checking account. I just don't fucking trust them. Like, anything that has that kind of branding on it with Wells Fargo, I get skeptical. Like, I actually have like an extended member of our family who works there. And I'm like, what's that like? He goes, well, I have to deal with that judgment quite a bit. He goes, the people I work with have all moved over from different branches. We do the right thing. He goes, but it's tough because we're not thought of very highly.
I mean, the last thing I'll just say on that, I worked in home building where there's millions of signatures, for 13 years, and mortgages, there's even more. And I used to tell people all the time, Frankie, I'm going to make this real simple and I don't need to put this in writing. You only sign your own name. You only initial your own initials. You only write today's date, right? Because those are the three main areas where
Those are the big things they got in trouble for last time.
Right? People signing for other people,
Right.
initialing a page that they hadn't seen for them to be fast, or backdating something so that they could get it done. Those three things are all illegal. If you do that in the mortgage business, because it's highly regulated. So I would just say those three things. Let me make it simple. So I said it all the time, and I had someone in Florida who was signing for customers all the time. And he was doing it to make his bonus. He wasn't a good performer. It wasn't a great time for it to happen for us, but I flew down there. I figured it out. He admitted to it. I fired him summarily on the spot. It was miserable, Frank. He had 100 customers in his pipeline and I had no one to give them to. So I had to fly people in and out from Virginia for 6 months. It ravaged our profit, ravaged our service. It kind of ruined my whole year for that region, but I had to do it because I told everyone I will do it. That one was easy. Then like 2 years later, one of my favorite employees ever did it and got caught. Initialed, signed, backdated, just a couple of documents, but it got out to the whole branch that he had done it. And now, Frankie, for years, I have been getting in front of my whole team saying the same thing. If you sign for someone else, if you initial anyone else's initials, or you date anything not today's date, I will fire you. I had said that so many times. I want to make this real clear. And it broke my heart because this was one of my favorite employees. He made a mistake and I couldn't go back on it because I had fired people before for doing this, because I know the slippery slope. I know that when you say that and then you say, I'm going to give you a chance. Now I've just said, if you sign for another customer, you get one chance.
So
now there's no longer a rule.
There's a person who was a 1099, kind of worked on the outside, that we brought under the tent. And she is now in court and going through a whole bunch of things. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, literally, that's happening now in Richmond. Like, it's in the business paper every day. And we found out it wasn't completely disclosed to us. And we did the right thing. We gave her some time to sort her affairs out, and we treated her very, very well. But at the same time, we had to say goodbye. Like, we just had to say, like, she couldn't work here anymore because of, like, if we're going to be moral and ethical, you got to be moral and ethical, and you have to be willing to do very, very tough things, no matter what it means to what your sacrifice has to be to get that done. Because if you don't, like, most people who cheat start somewhere. There's like a gateway to it, right? Like, I'll use a very different example because this is easier to see. I have a grandfather and an aunt who were addicted to drugs and alcohol, one of which died early. My granddad, my aunt's been in and out of prison multiple times. I grew up thinking I'm probably an addict or I'm addicted, and I stayed away from drugs. I never did them. And I got in trouble with alcohol when I was 19, and I decided I'm not going to drink for a while. And I didn't drink for like 2 years. And the reason for it was I could see my life spiraling out of control. That is a controllable thing. I saw it and I'm like, I do not want to go in the trajectory of them, so I'm going to change it. So with cheating, it's harder because there's usually a gateway, or there's usually something you do. It's like, okay, that was okay. I got away with it. How can I keep doing that? It's not as cut and dry as like drugs and alcohol, but you have to understand where you are, and you have to say, okay, I'm not willing to do this. And it's easy, right? Like it's just easier and cleaner. But if you make that commitment, you have to live that commitment. And it's unforgiving in some ways, but in the end, I think this is the whole purpose we're doing this. In the end, we all think as a society, we're better off if we make the right choice, because if we didn't, what will we have?
Yeah. And Frankie, just the last thing I remember when you told me about that whole situation going up, and it blew up, right? There's lawyers involved. There's an article in a paper.
Yes.
It was a mess. And I remember do you remember the visceral reaction? I got angry.
You were pissed.
And this is a person I liked, but
Yeah.
you know who I like more? Frank's dad. It's one of my favorite humans in the world. And Frank's dad's name is on Frank's door. And I told you that. I said, dude, I know your emotions are tied up in this, and it's a good person and all this, but that will drag, if you allow that and you defend it. Now you are saying that Cava stands for this kind of behavior, and your dad stands for that. And it's like, you have to draw the line and say there are certain things that we accept, certain things we don't. So Frankie, what's your wrap on this thing? What's your final thoughts?
Cheating is seductive, and it's seductive because it's easier than doing the work. Don't be seduced. Do the work. Do the things you have to do. So I'm going to go back to your buddy for a minute, right? Wes Pierce. He got seduced in a way where he worked harder to not do the work than if he would have really done the work. He got seduced again by penny stocks. And there was a period where he flew all of you guys out to Vegas in a private plane. But it didn't age well. It didn't age well for him. He had a couple of incredible highs, but most of the time he kind of like, it didn't age as well as it could have because he didn't do the work. The people who I see are the richest. It's not necessarily through dollars. Like Ian's dad is rich. We had this conversation. He went to work every day. He did the right things, and he built a legacy day over day over day in doing things he loved. And he had a skill set that was kind of left behind. That is, I think, what reward looks like in today's society. It's not to the cheater or the person who tries to skip the line. Skipping the line's fun for a moment, but long term, it just is not a sustainable thing.
I think the last thing I'll just say is people are incredibly forgiving of failures, of mistakes, of lapses in judgment, but they are not forgiving when it comes to cheating, to integrity, to people without a moral compass, and certainly those who attain some level of success by working outside of the rules. It's something you'll be painted with the rest of your life. It's all the people that I had to fire, Frank. I've had to, I've been in business 20 years. I've had to fire a hell of a lot of people, and a lot of them for performance. The ones that got fired for performance, Frank, I can really barely remember why they weren't performing or what
ethical
happened.
breaches you can remember.
I remember every single person who had an integrity violation I had to fire them for, and that is all I think of. A lot of the people that are fired for failure, they've gone on to do other things, and I'm happy for them, and that's great. And I don't remember why it didn't work, but the people who had integrity breaches, that's who they are for the rest of their life. Like they are, it's a scarlet letter on them. And I would just say, if you were confused anywhere earlier in the episode and you want to learn more about vibrating anal beads, you can send Frank a direct message to ask him questions more about it. He's more of an expert than I am. He taught me a little bit about it before we got into the outline.
So I'm going to take a second chance at a wrap, and I'm going to tell you this. So my mom, my dad were in town last weekend, and we were talking about something, and like, we're a family that remembers things and kind of holds a grudge. And like, we're also incredibly close, so we're not going to go after each other in a way that's malicious. But we were literally talking about an event from 1992, and we were re-legislating it at my dinner table. And what I can tell you is that's not an anomaly. People remember, and
Yeah.
people hold grudges, and people will hold you to a standard. If you are a cheater, you're going to be branded a cheater for a very long time. If you make a mistake, that's different. That's allowable. We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
But if you're branded a cheater, it's very hard to come back from, and people's memories are very long. So you've got to be very, very, very careful with that. And if you're cheating, you haven't gotten caught, stop, figure out how to get around it. Like, how do you, like, these are things that they just don't age well. So it's I don't know. That's what I would say.
But Frankie, you are aging tremendously. I've been looking at old videos of you on this podcast. You don't look a day older than when we started this 106 episodes ago.
You're not kidding. It's my incredible lighting.
It's really incredible. It's really incredible. So, hey, if you are one of our longtime followers or even new, we would love it if you gave us a 5-star review and wrote some nice comments so we knew who you were. And if you are new to this, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Frankie, peace in the Middle East.
No doubt, Ian. Good talking to you.